here, because you submitted a couple questions ahead of time. So if you don't mind, get us started. If you can, you're on mute right now, but just start off with maybe your first question. You talked about like headlines versus headings. What, can you explain that question a little bit?
No, I wanted Peter to explain it.
So what's the difference between a headline
It just came up with the new upgrade.
Yeah, I'll show
Because
you.
it was all considered headers before, and now all of a sudden, and when I click on it, they both look the same to me.
Yeah, so let me show you. I'm going to
See, I knew you'd do it.
I'm going to call up a window, and I got too many things open like usual. And you're Generate Press, right? Not that it matters exactly, but
Yeah, I am.
Okay. All right, so if we go, let me see. Of course, I put this in the one window that now I can't find, but it doesn't matter. I'll show you anyway. I'll do it live. I'll do it live because that is what we do here.
And I changed the sharing so anyone can share.
Okay. So I'm going to share this one, I think.
So this is something that changed with 5.5?
It is, you see a screen right now?
Yep.
Okay, great. So what the challenge here, and I'll tell you, as we've had this conversation for a few times about the great power and the great challenge of WordPress is that there's so many ways to do the same thing. And what I think you've run into, Judith Ann, is the fact that there are multiple, as you add block libraries or blocks, different block libraries have their own versions of a lot of things. And that the headline is what I think you're encountering, and when I do it, you tell me if this is what you're used to, is when I go to add a block and say, so right now we're just straight in the editor, and if I say this is a headline, now I'm doing it purposefully just in the default of the paragraph, right? So when you enter a block, you can now change it to things as long as it's within, if it's a text file, paragraph, or you can also go to add a block and then you get your choices of, all the many things that you can add. Like I've got different plugins right now, a lot of these things, and I'll show you how you can even turn some of these things off. But there is multiple headlines depending on which block libraries or block plugins you've added, and if you're using Generate Press, do you know, Judith Ann, what block libraries you're using? I think you're probably using, I think it was the Generate, yeah. So the Generate blocks headline. So
yeah, the one you talked about last month. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So headline is.
I think you got the wrong one there too.
Yeah, this is purposeful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. So headline is WordPress core. Right. I'm going to duplicate this. So this is headline. This is, I'm going to change this one to, sorry, I know what you mean. This is heading. Okay, this is headline. And the way we know it is when we look at, sorry to be jumping around, but if I think the other one was advanced headline. I'll show it to you in a sec. When you click on it, you've got, so heading is WordPress core. Headline is Generate blocks. And I'll show you what the difference is. Advanced heading is from the Cadence group. and there's even more, right? So what happens is when you look, I'm going to have to move you guys over here. So WordPress core comes with heading, which gives you a few options. You can change the color of the heading. You don't have a lot of control over too many things. It's color settings. And then you have kind of basic size changes. So you can change to custom size. That's what comes with WordPress, right? You know, out of core. Headline is from Generate Blocks, and it offers a whole lot of options here. So they are both headings in that they're H2, H3, H4, and you can set those, right? So I can set this to H1, H2, H3, H4. That is the outline, right? So your title of your page could be a H1, your H2 subtitle, and so on. They both have that. So say H2, H1, all right? They show them a little differently because they're coded differently. WordPress core, headline, heading, Generate Blocks comes with the headline, but what you get is a ton more options built in, including as you drill down. So now I have typography, and I can show advanced typography, setting the font, setting the font size, the line height, the letter spacing. You have all kinds of control in advanced. Sorry, I should not look at advanced word in the word headline that comes with Generate Blocks. You have a lot of control over the spacing around it, right? So padding, you know, if you want your headline to have a padding of 100 below it, 100 pixels below it, that's margin, and so on. You can add a border. Colors, you can have a background color of this, right? So these are all built into the headline block, which comes with Generate Blocks. Now, an advanced headline is going to have its own. The advanced headline comes with cadence blocks, and it has its own set of choices here. So it's not nearly as advanced as headline. I think headline is the more powerful one. So one recommendation is find one that you like, and then when you go into your block manager, which is top right, the 3 bullets down, or the 3 dots down, this is where you can turn things on and off. I don't know if you remember, if we have gone over this at all, but these are all the millions of blocks. Like if I don't want to see any of the embed blocks, if I turn those off, now when I go look at my choices of blocks, I won't see these anymore. My list will get smaller. If I choose to not look at the cadence advanced heading, if I uncheck that, I won't see that in the lists anymore. My headline is under my Generate Blocks. I like that one. The normal, and they're also color coded, although some of them, when they get to a light blue and a dark blue, it gets a little bit hard to see. But your different block libraries that might come, you know, getting a whole bunch of blocks with one plugin. The core ones are in black, and now this heading here, like I'm going to go in there and turn off that heading because I'm going to prefer headline that comes with Generate Blocks. And instead of getting confused of one over the other, I'm picking, you know what, I'm going to stick to headline. They do the same thing at the base level, and then I have all this other functionality.
Checking it off doesn't like uninstall. It just means that it won't show up in that list, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So now, if I go to, say I go to add another block, I go to browse, you know, like all those embeds that were there are all gone now. And then if I go to text, headline should be gone because I turned it off. So I'm not even bothering myself to look through a longer list. So that's where the block manager comes in really handy. So the bottom line is there are multiple and almost every single one of these block libraries has their own version of a heading / headline. Pick the one you like. I like generate blocks.
If I can pile on to that wonderful explanation from Peter, I mean, this is, again, coming from a page builder world over the past couple of years of Divi. To me, this is one of the reasons why I'm I'm slowly veering towards Gutenberg, is because, you know, one of the things you're stuck with a page builder like Divi is you get the Divi headline block, or text block is basically what it is in Divi. So I know it's a little confusing at first when you see three different headline things, but to me, I mean, that's choice. I love the fact that somebody builds a better headline block, you know, go for it. You can add it to your library and use it. You don't have to use anything else from that block pattern. Again, sometimes that's a little confusing. You have too many blocks.
Yeah.
But like the one I really enjoy too is like a lot of them are doing great things with buttons. So like the button blocks. You know, the Gutenberg by itself, right? I keep saying Gutenberg, but, you know, the block editor from WordPress has a button, which is, you know, it's okay, but there's probably you know, many more advanced button. The one from Cadence is a wonderful replacement for the button. I mean, look at all these button blocks. You know?
Exactly. Exactly. The purple ones are from the Gutenberg set. Buttons comes with generate blocks. Advanced buttons is Cadence, and buttons in black is WordPress core. So, and what this one's also showing, and I'm just starting to get into, you know, when you get into block collections, where now you can add a whole thing that has all the things coming in one big package. We can play with this later if anyone's interested, because I'm just in the process of figuring this out myself. Oops, see, I want to go to the group. There we go. And move that. But yeah, so there's a lot of ways. Like, so buttons is a great example of where, just got to redo that. Where same thing. If there's one that you really like, use it and get rid of the other ones or hide them. Another way to get rid of them, by the way, with a lot of the groups, not only do you have the block manager, but if we go into, you know, like say settings, and say you have the Cadence blocks loaded, you can tell it to say at this level, so it's not even in the block manager, you're literally deactivating. You know, if you don't like their advanced headline, you can deactivate it, and it's not getting loaded. And most of these higher end groups will have this way of turning various, you know, each kind of block on or off at the plugin level versus at the block manager level, if that makes any sense. So it literally doesn't load anything related to it when you turn it off, and then you can reactivate it if you want to. Like, you know, I know that I'm not going to use a tab, so I might, you know, turn that off, and now it won't be available for me to see until I come in here and reactivate it. And you know, same thing with ultimate add-ons for Gutenberg, which is another one. They just do it differently. You know, if you're never going to use the, I don't know, the testimonial, you can deactivate it. So that's yet another way to manage. But as you look at each one of these lists, this is where you can see redundancy. It's like, oh, they have their version of a whatever, a Google map, and the other one had a Google map, and so on. All right, Judith Ann, did that make any sense whatsoever?
Yes.
Okay.
Cleared it up, because all I did was type the way you did, and they all look the same.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't see what the difference is.
Yeah.
So when you showed us the buttons, are you going to go back to that and show us how to use them?
We can, yeah. Yeah. You want to do that now, or you want to?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and we're winging it. So as we do it, anyone chime in and tell me what you want to hear or whatever. So let's start with the core one, right? So what comes with WordPress itself. So I'm adding this button. It's defaulting to the colors in my palette, and also whatever I do is I'm looking over here to the right for under your settings, you've got your document settings and you have your block settings. So this is one of the first things that you kind of have to start getting used to when you're using blocks, is this idea of where am I getting that, you know, the settings for something that I'm on. but basically I come over here and I pull up block. And now I have a lot of the choices here for the button. Oh, and what also drives me crazy is,
sorry, Peter. So
yeah.
the other thing too, that just going back to like when we first all those of us who looked at Gutenberg in the beginning, one of my main complaints early on was it was very easy to get lost in this, in this white space. But between what Peter showed and the other little trick, people may have missed it. And Peter, you've been using Gutenberg enough now where I think it's second nature to you, is that bottom left navigation there.
Oh, this is
the breadcrumbs. That's another, I'm not sure when that showed up, but that's an amazing way to not lose context of where you are and jump around.
This is huge because it'll show you what's nested inside of what. And that's where I knew that big group had all these things inside it, and I wanted to get rid of the group. So I just used this hierarchy breadcrumb thing to go to the thing that was containing everything.
Yes, a container above it, or the lower level container. Yeah.
Exactly. So looking at the button, say I wanted to do, a link to WordPress.org, right? So I just typed in the text here, my link button for where to go to, right? So I'll just do, I should do it this way, right? WordPress.org. By the way, whenever you're doing links, I don't know if anyone else has run into this, but I'm like, I put that link in, you have to hit that little arrow thing a lot of times. Another thing with links, like if you're using text or headlines or things, what's great now is how you can, if you have a link, say to an external site or whatever, if you copy that link, you can paste it on top of text and it'll say, oh, you want a link here, and it'll do it'll put the link in for you, which is great. Like any link, you have the choice of deciding if you want it to be, say, opening up in a new tab. Maybe you're sending somebody off, but you're trying not to have them leave your site. Whether you think that's good or bad, that's an option. Now you have, I'm over here to the right, and now it's like, okay, do I want it filled outline? And I probably have to do all my color settings here. So so my text is already white. If I wanted my text and border to be red, which is terrible looking, the background color, but say I wanted something like that, right? So now I'm dealing with the settings here, border radius, maybe you don't like round corners and so on. This is all in the button that comes with WordPress, right? And so, and they're keeping everything, pretty simple. So now if I want to add another button, let's compare something to another button. Let's look at the one that comes with generate blocks, which is, I've mentioned a few times, which is this one. So now it's default, but you can see all of these choices here, right? So where I didn't have these choices, now I have a lot of that same kind of control over typography, spacing, the colors that I want, if I want this to be, a golden color. So you're given that many more options. I could still have this. Actually, I don't know. Oh, okay. Look, I didn't know it was going to do that. They've built in a duplicate as a plus, and I guess the assumption is that you're going to line up a bunch of buttons. That's kind of the way generate blocks, that block package plugin adds, manages things. It kind of breaks it down into these things, saying, well, a lot of times people put, maybe you're going to use a bunch of buttons actually for navigation, for example.
You probably want spacing between them, right? So they're not stacked.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that if I select both of them and then look at spacing and then look at the margin and set the margin, say, the right to 10 and the left to 10. So now I've added two buttons. Right now they're going nowhere because I didn't put a link to anything. They're not doing what the WordPress one is, where the link is right up here, where do we think they're going to put the link? I think they're going to put it over here in settings.
Type in the URL. So let's just type it in.
It's right in front of me.
Yeah.
That's why Ray is here.
It's kind of weird though. Yeah, does it? No. Oh, okay. I
No, I put, yeah. So
yeah, type in
the
there.
label is, I'm just typing over and paste the URL and type it into search. And what they mean by search too is it's like a lot of the WordPress thing where you start, if it's local to your site, if you start typing it in, it'll look and say, oh, you have a page called that, and I'm gonna, I'll show you that. I'll let you pick that right there. So if I do this, and maybe I want to do, all right, so I just did 2 buttons. If I publish this and view it, so now there's my WordPress one. Nothing fancy about it. There was hover colors that we didn't look at right now, but you know, that should go to WordPress.org. That should go to WordPress.com, which are 2 different things. They shouldn't be. A lot of people are saying they shouldn't be named the same thing because of the confusion that has. This one should open another window because that's what I click. So now I need another tab. So my original's still there. So you can see, similar to the headlines, just a developer in the Generate Press folks for Generate blocks. And again, Cadence has them, Stacker, Otter, all of these different types of block library developers are going to do something like this a little bit differently. And again, it's like, you know, when you find one that you really like, then you can just stick with it. And because of all the options and functions, I would probably go with the Generate blocks choice. So, and Cadence has its own, and I don't know if I have Cadence loaded, and we can go into it, but you can see where they do the same thing at one level, but what's built into it for all of the control that you can have over it.
I got a couple of questions.
Absolutely.
Is your taskbar on your left side of your screen or on your right side?
So
I mean your palette, the thing that has categories, permalink, tags, featured image. I got it on the right side. Is yours on the right side or left side?
That's on the left side for me.
Okay.
Yep.
And when you said H1, H2, H3, H4,
yep.
I know that's headings, and there's codes in Dreamweaver which indicates they're important words for search engines. Is that also the same with WordPress?
Yeah, absolutely. So the H1, H2, H3 are HTML tags. So that is ultimately WordPress is outputting HTML and JavaScript and all, but it's ultimately outputting you know, an HTML page. And the H1 tag, the H2 tag, the H3 tag, though, that when we look at those headings, we'll see those same tags that you would see in Dreamweaver. And what they're most important for when it comes to both SEO, usability, accessibility, is the organization of your document. A lot of people are using them purely for design, and that's not really what they're there for. They're there to, you know, basically think, you know, freshman high school essay writing, and the organization that you would have for it, the outline that you would create. That's where the H1, H2, H3. So there needs to be some logic to it. And in fact, there's a lot of control built into WordPress.
That's a real neat feature. You can see the structure in there. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Where is it? Right. Where did they move it to, Ray?
You had it. I think you just had it there in the eye. Click on the eye again. You were just there.
Yeah,
okay.
yes, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I just didn't have this. I don't have a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it has that warning too. It's saying,
Yeah.
hey, you have an H3 here. Where's your H1 and H2?
This is genius. Yeah, exactly. And this really helps you understand your document. And in fact, Judith Ann, you had another question that we can talk about that I can show this a little bit differently too. But yeah, that's exactly the heading tags, HTML tags, are very important for defining the layout and, yes, the importance of a document. So if you think in terms of, you know, you're writing an essay, and you have headings and subheadings and all that tell you this bunch of text is about this topic, and this bunch of text is a subtopic of that. And that's how you should be thinking about using the headings, and that tells Google what those sections are. It tells accessibility people, you know, well, I want to jump to that area, and so on. So yeah, Robin, that's how that works. It works the same way. It's just it's built into a lot of the WordPress tools, and right now as you're getting into it using the block editor, a lot of people are still kind of used to the classic editor, but you would assign something a heading and tell it, is this an H1 and H2 and H3, H4 and so on.
Is that following a headline too?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, so if we were to look at this page here, I don't like doing this when it's an admin. So this is one of the things I do is do this real, go to the document, and this is where sometimes I'm still trying to, where I look to find things, because where I'm used to seeing, like, you have to open up your permalink. If I open this up in a incognito window, I won't have all the WordPress admin bar, which means I'm not getting the admin bar code. If I look at the page source here, this is all the HTML code, and if I look for where are you? Where's my search? For some reason, I wonder why. For some reason, I'm not seeing when I Control F it to do the search.
Your cursor's on it for some reason, but it's not.
Yeah. I don't know. But anyway, you'll see the HTML, and in here, oops, don't do that. There. So there's an H2.
You can also see it, Peter, if you go back to the editor too. I mean, the thing about Word, especially with this
Yes.
Gutenberg thing, for people who aren't familiar with, you know, if you use the classic editor, you had the ability to switch between views. You could see your HTML view and your visual view. You can still see it here. Yeah, just you have to go this extra step now, click Edit as HTML, and there you go. So if you ever need to, where this is, again, this is more of a tip for folks, where this is still important is, let's say you're using, you know, one of these blocks where you can't find something, you need to add a class, or
Yeah.
again, you want to do further styling. If you go in this way, you can still get to the raw HTML this way.
Yep. So if I edit visually, now I'm back here. By the way, in case anyone ever does something, gets confused, here's a neat little, while I'm thinking of it. This is just if I were to come here and copy all this, and then just drop it into a text editor, this is where you're going to see, this is all the coding that comes with defining the blocks. This gets interesting, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because just today I was copying something and I pasted it, but I had something that was a classic block, right, from the old editor. Now you have a classic block, and it pasted in this as opposed to because the page was in a classic edit mode, not a block edit mode. But so if you happen to see this type of code, know that what you've done is you've grabbed the code behind the block, if you will. Just thought those.
So someday, if I ever do a deep dive into the WordPress database, you'll also see where that code lives.
That's right. Yep.
I have a question on headlines, Peter.
Yeah.
We've always just used the same headline. We just check off, I think it's H4. Every time we write a blog, all of our headlines are H4s. Am I hurting our blog by doing that?
If you don't mind me bringing up your site.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is your now redesigned site. Still happy with it?
Oh, we love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have not been near an internet all summer. So we just come home and write it and go back to the lake. So
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a choice, by the way. That's not like because the power was out. You're off the
That's a
grid
choice,
where you
yeah.
are, which is great. So if let's see if I have anything open here. There's all kinds of tools to see this. No, I don't want that. That's just telling me. Ray, do you remember the tool that shows you?
I thought it was font. I thought it was the inspect font or whatever, the one that you have. I mean, if you just right click and do page source, you can
Yeah.
find, or inspect that element instead. It's usually probably the quickest way. Double click on that, and inspect it. That's an H1. Yeah.
That's an H1. So your title, but this title is what you're filling in at the top of the blog post.
Yeah.
That's an H1. So you're telling Google and you're telling screen readers and all of that. The title of this document is number 59, the tomato star of the summer garden. So that's good. Although, and Ray, what do you think? There is some debate about that, right? That in a weird way, there are people who are saying, well, your website title should be an H1. This is an H2.
I think for a blog, I think you want your H1 titles to be the blog
Yeah.
title. Again, back to what Peter was saying about, and this is where blogs, every website's a little bit different depending on the usage, but in a blog, remember all these tags we're talking about are also per page, not per site. So
Yes.
for this page, this blog post, you want your H1 to be what your title of the blog is, or what this blog post is. So you want it to be tomatoes, where we said. I guess where I would quibble with your H1 in this particular case is that number in there, that number 59.
Yeah.
The number is probably something, I don't know if you put that in or if the blog itself.
We started that with number 1 and we just put it in. And we keep debating whether to just take it out or when I do my slug, I do take it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you do that, then I would almost, because again, the posts themselves have metadata behind them too. So if someone ever wants to see them, usually it's by date order. So that's already being stored. So that's typically how these things are displaying anyway. So you don't need to manually order your blog post. WordPress is doing it for you.
Yeah. So I think our recommendation is you really don't need to number your blog posts. It's just extra. You are sorting them by date descending. So your most recent one is at the top. And then what you're describing is here, right? So these are all H4s.
Yes.
Yeah. And I can see that we're now looking at the source code. If we went into the editor, we would see that these are H4s. So here's the answer. You're not doing it correctly, but you're not doing something so terrible that Google's going to ignore you completely. And in fact, there's a lot of talk about the use of H1 of the headings where Google will ultimately figure out what the page is about, but it's always nice to help them. And so really what you should have is, if this is an H1, this should be an H2. And this should be H2, and this should be H2. Now, if under one of these you had other subsections, that would be an H3. Like,
okay.
Right? So that's how you should be using these types of things. Like if under I don't know if there's a good example here, but
if under determinants we talked about heirlooms.
Yeah. And if that was its own section, that might be an H3. Yeah.
Okay.
And then when you're looking to outline, you would say, just if you were to take out all the words and just look at that, you would say, okay, title, subtitle, subsection of that, next subsection, next, section, subsection, and so on.
Okay. That makes sense.
And Sharon, I don't know if you do this, but I think a lot of people use headings, like Peter was saying earlier on, for font sizes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a quick and dirty way to say, oh, this thing's too big, so let me use an H4 and it's smaller.
Right.
But really, you know, there's better ways to change it so your H2s are the size, because that's the thing. Like ideally, before you start working at any site, you want to kind of determine what are your font sizes going to look like, and generally they're in different degrees of each other. Like your H1's your biggest, but then typically your H2 is, you know, whatever 75% of your H1, and so on going down. So that's, you know, it's almost like if you set that universally, then you could keep H2s and you can make the H2s whatever size you want. Let's say you want your H2 to be 50% of your H1. That's really the way to do it, is do that universally across your site instead of falsely using, you know,
Yeah.
H4.
Okay. So can I change the size of my H2?
Oh, yeah.
Your theme, but most likely, I don't know what theme you're using. Most likely, yes, you can change it at a global setting. That's where the customizer usually.
I was going to show. Yeah, exactly. Let's see what I've got here. I'm not even sure which one I'm looking at right now. Okay, so this was something we're playing at one point. So yeah, go to customize. Now you're under cadence.
Yeah.
I think we moved you to. So
Yeah.
I have that over here. Okay, so but yeah, so if you are, I don't know if this site has anything. No, not really. But if you go to customize, and every theme is going to be slightly different in how they place these things, but typically there's going to be a typography section somewhere, and this will drive you crazy. And by the way, there's a plugin that is a customizer search. Now, if you have one, if you're dealing with one site and you have the one theme that you're using on the site, just get to know it and you'll be fine. If
Okay.
a guy like me that's jumping around, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. In Astra, typography is here, and in Cadence, it's here, and it's just depends on whether they've decided that it is a general setting, or under, you know, does all typography go together, or does all heading section go together, and all. So sometimes you have to search and find things. But right now I'm under, for Cadence, for you, because you have a Cadence, if you go to customizer, you go under general and then typography, and that's where you have your H1, H2, H3, H4, and then you have the sizes, 32 pixels, 28, 24, and so on. So this is where you would change the numbers. Let's see. That should be an 8. I think that's an H2. Let's find out. So font size, yeah. See how I'm using this now, and that in this particular case, the blog title is an H2 because I'm now changing the H2 font size. So what we would recommend to you is making sure that your subsections are H2. Then open up that blog post. Open up a blog post, and then you can look at the output of that blog post. This blog post has nothing in it, and then make sure that, you know, okay.
I would say it's not worth going back and changing these. Oh, your own blog, you're gonna get zero benefit from doing that for yourself. All the blog posts you've written, don't bother. Like from an SEO standpoint, this is more of those that you get lesson learned for people if you're creating new ones. If you're going to start over again, you want to set these things properly to begin with. But to go back and change all these, you're probably going to screw up your site a bit more than you want, because you're going to, you know, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize I was using the default size for an H2 somewhere.
That's a great point, Ray. Sometimes I see a lot of people put so much effort into something that has so little payoff.
Yeah.
Spend that time writing the next great post.
The other part that, from a blog standpoint, that you may want to look at if you haven't is I would actually spend more time on your meta descriptions.
Yeah.
And making sure. So as you said, if you go, Peter, can you go back to Sherry's site again for a second?
Yep.
And if you look at that, let's look at one of those blog posts. So this is what a lot of people, depending on what you're using for an SEO tool, some tools make it more obvious to you of what your meta description is, or they'll let you change it or put one in. But if you're using kind of just the standard off-the-shelf theme or something, a lot of times people don't even fill it in. So the meta description, just a reminder for folks, when you search on Google, you're searching, let's say, for a page or a blog post or something, you'll see the page title, but then below that, you'll see a little snippet of what's called the meta description. So here, that's good. So yours looks like, I don't know if you type that in, Sherry, or if that's just taking it, maybe if you have Yoast or something, maybe it's taking the first, whatever, 130 characters of your post. But the meta description is useful both for Google for search standpoint, but also for people. The big thing is this displays on search results. So you want it to make it enticing, so somebody will click and do your blog post.
Yeah.
So just from an SEO standpoint, you spend more time in your meta descriptions. Don't worry about the H4s and H3s and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah. So and there's a couple of places where you're going to summarize the metadata. One is the use of the excerpt versus just grab a certain amount of text. And then if you have a certain type of SEO plugin, whether you use Yoast or Rank Math or SEO Press or any of those types of things, you can override things by typing into the description. One thing to keep in mind, Google takes that as a suggestion, but not as gospel. That description may or may not be used as your, if you go do a search in Google and see the little sub part, they may or may not use that description, especially based on what somebody has searched for. They typically try to pull something out of it, out of your text that matches what the search is. It's an interesting dynamic that can be very confusing. So I don't mean to confuse anybody right now.
Is H5 the lowest?
H6 that I know of. Yeah. But you gotta, if you're using it correctly, you're rarely down that low. That's like a academic paper, I think.
That's your footnotes room.
Yeah. Might be.
This is good. Judith Ann, see this one question. We had an hour's worth of content out of it. I like it.
Go.
Wait till you get the next one.
Let's jump
Hey,
up. Let's
Hey,
take
Peter.
first. Let's go to Reese. You had a good one around sandboxing, completely different topic from this. Do you want to?
Yeah, but
Or go ahead. Yeah.
before we go, so Peter, when you're building your buttons, and let's say you've gotten, I'll take your 2 yellow ones.
Yep.
And now you've decided that you want to use those across your entire site.
Yeah.
So instead of building them over and over again, what would you do?
Yeah, that's what would I do now? There are, Ray, do you have one while I'm fishing for mine? Because so one of the options
it's built into WordPress now. So in the past, this was my whole thing about, in a page builder world, if I was building these in Divi, I would save these to my Divi library. And then in the Divi library world, I can make them global so that anywhere on my page, I can change those buttons and it'll be changed everywhere. Where I believe, and I think I got this accidentally, but now if you hover over those 2 buttons, Peter, and get it back into the block editor mode.
Yep. Oh, wait a minute, where am I?
I thought if you go to the 3 buttons on the top, 3 dots, you can now add them to reusable blocks.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that's global or not, though.
Okay.
that I was going to say. So one way is you save the block as a reusable block, or you save it as a block, as a one into your own. This is where they're adding save your own block collections and things like that. The challenge with that is doing it right the first time and then using that. what they're working on is, and there's different ways, but this idea of saying, well, I set it to a class, and then that class, that's where the purists will look at it and say, well, you make all your blocks a certain class, and then you have some CSS code that defines everything specifically, and then when you change the CSS, it changes that for all of your, all of your buttons that have that class. We're not there yet, and in fact, I know that there are efforts to put in things with, like, even with plugins and stuff that are using global palettes and colors, but that's a problem we have even with page builders, right? And so
yeah, I mean, Divi and I think Elementor, and I'm sure the other ones do this too. I mean, they do save it to a global library, so you are really making a change to what. And if you look behind the scenes, all it's really doing is basically what you said, Peter. That all the styling and stuff, it's just saving as a global CSS. So it's applying that to every version of that button. So yeah, this thing, I think, and this is a good test. I think if you click Add to Reusable Blocks, it's more of making a copy of the block that you can then paste on other pages, anywhere else you can paste that. But if you went and switched the links on those on one page, my understanding, it's not going to go and change the links all across your site, that they're really just copies of these block patterns.
Yeah, so let's make sure of something, because the way, so I'm going to update this. Let's quickly go to let's come over here to a blog post. And now if I want to add
your reusable tab.
Right there. So I've added this 2 yellow buttons. That's what I just did when I went click. If I add that, though, these, as I understand it, these are now universal. These are the same blocks. What you have to do is you have to
try changing the URL in there.
Yeah, good point.
Like a google.com or something.
Yeah. Okay. So now if I update this, view the post, there they are. So it goes to Google. Now what you want to make sure is if you go to the other one, I go to the headlines one that we were playing with just a little bit. I go to edit, not edit, I can go to view that.
Ooh, wow.
Right, because see how the bottom left, it's going to go, that's a universal block. And where that gets really handy is if you do things like, say you create a call to action that you want to have on the bottom of all your page, and you want to universally change that one section for all of these different pages. That's where you would use the reusable block, where the settings carry over, they become global settings. What you have to do is, I'm going to edit it, I'm going to the block, right? And there is somewhere, and I haven't used this much, convert to regular block. So that's where you can save all the styling. When you convert it to regular block, now it's decoupled from that global one, and now you can make them, I can change this to google.com, like so, and update that and view that, and you can see that now that says google.com, and I should feel pretty confident that the other one is not going to say, so it doesn't, because I've decoupled them. That's how that's the beauty of reusable blocks. When you can use this one block that is used across all pages, that you're controlling that one section in one place and it's universal, it's a global change. Using it as a template or a pattern is using this, converting it, and then now you can change it. But thank you, WordPress, as it keeps changing. That's also where the block pattern, I keep calling them collections. The block pattern now is the thing that you would create to then not have to do that, right? So now you open a pattern that is already like decoupled, and now you've done your styling. But this is all separate from the fact that you've placed buttons and you want all of your buttons to look the same way, which Reese, I think is what you were kind of thinking about, which is.
That's correct.
Yeah. And that is something that is a challenge for a lot of these page builders and all. So it's kind of like get your, the easiest thing is to get your design right, or make sure that everything has its own class using CSS, but then you got to be really good at CSS, because now you're overriding everything by going in there and saying, background,
So like this theme that you're using though, Peter, the generate press, for example, a lot of times the button stylings, at least a lot of the themes I've used, those are also in the customizer too. So if you want to, let's say, make all my buttons be yellow, font size 15, etc. Some of these let you do it here. I don't know. And again, it's more the page builder world. I don't know if these guys do it here as well.
Yeah, no, you're right. And guess what? You gotta love it. This is where it gets so powerful and so confusing. And I get the confusion part, because, well, that'll only work if you haven't gone and used a button type that has its, is from like these that we're using, that has all its own controls. Because there's always there's a hierarchy of how styles on the CSS work. So, at the core, it might say, oh, based on my universal style sheet, all my buttons are blue. But you've added this button and you've told it to be yellow. And then using this other thing, you've done something, and so one will overwrite the other one. There's a hierarchy of how these styles are applied. So that's true so long as you probably only use the WordPress core button that has the fewest options, because now you're dealing with changing those options at more of a customizer level. Right? Does that make sense, Ray?
Yeah, no, specificity is what they call it in like CSS. It's the most specific thing. That's the thing that because it's cascading, the whole term cascading style sheet. So last style wins, basically.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. So there's always the benefit of keeping something as close to core as possible, if then you're going to apply something to everything that's there, versus getting into a level of, I've added a button here and I've made it look like this, and over here made it look like this. To go in there and universally change that, it's like you've already changed it down the line, if you know what I mean.
I will say, again, as a guy who, like, I've been working almost exclusively just on my own sites with Divi, the past couple of years or so. And as I said, I am venturing back into the the wilderness of Gutenberg and all that, because I think there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in there. But one thing, for if anyone else is in my situation, the thing I think that people are going to face is, anytime you've been working with one theme for a long time, you kind of are used to the path, you're used to the way that one theme works. And for better for it's like I'm an Apple guy, for better for worse. And the nice thing about an ecosystem like Apple or some of the page builders is it's a closed world, so everything works well together. When you get into this world of Gutenberg and all these blocks and all that, it's almost the Android world, just these Apple versus a Google analogy here. You have so much flexibility, but now you got to be a little bit more careful, because you're not in this bubble anymore. That some things may clash with each other a little bit, where things aren't exactly where you think they are. But I think the trade-off of that is you get tremendous flexibility, and hey, that's the power of WordPress, is all of the things that, like Peter is showing here. This thing is getting, it is a convert back to Gutenberg. This thing is getting much more powerful, and it's starting to pass from an innovation standpoint, I think, where the page builders are. I mean, there's stuff happening here that, Divi does this, but Divi's been doing it and Divi hasn't really improved on the way they do these things. So this is exciting to me.
one thing that I think exists, but not in a way that is super easy to deal with. I know the page builders are, but where you could copy the style and apply that style pretty easily, which is one way to say, okay, I change it now. I'm just going to, instead of going through and clicking each one of these types of things, there's sort of an overall settings for that block. I don't know if it's something in development, but I know, I have since it's something that's in the page builders and all, now I imagine it's going to be coming. So I was trying it right now to say, okay, can I copy the styling and all the settings from this block to this same type of block that might be different and make them then the same? I don't think we're there yet, but I'm going to predict it's not that far off. Oh, and by the way, down here, remember I was turning things on and off? Not in the block manager, but literally in the, like in Cadence, I turned off the advanced heading as an example of showing. Now what's happening is this page where I had put that is saying that I don't understand what you're trying to do. So what do you want to do with it? If I turn it back on, this will work. I can keep it as HTML, which would give me this, or I can just delete it, which is that. So. Okay, where we? What time and where are we at? Okay.
Go, when you have a chance, I'd like to ask a question.
Yep.
Okay. And then what we'll do? Let's get Robin your questions, and then let's talk about Sandbox, and then let's come back to the links within a document that I know Judith Ann had asked for. That all make sense? Okay. Silence is complicit.
Yeah, when you have a chance, I'd just like to ask a question. I don't want to break away from the goodness that you guys are doing right now, but I would like to maybe suggest something that you guys have done in the past, but just request a little bit more basic. I'm of all I've done, I peek and poke, and I think I've done pretty good. I am terrified of themes. I would love to update my theme, but I just terrified. So
Which show you were at our last presentation was all about themes.
Yeah, I was not, and I did try to do that. I would just want like a session like this, a little bit more in depth of just the very basic. Here's how you change a theme, and here's what could happen when you change a theme.
Yeah,
that's the part that and I think I was on that a little bit of time, and then I couldn't be on the whole time, so I apologize.
Also, I think if we have time, we can cover that a little bit, but I think we also have the recording of that session too, which you can fast forward through, because we do show that quite a bit, Peter. In fact, I think flips between activating themes and all that. So
yeah,
right. I'm just afraid of how can I get back, and that's really the part, because my website, for example, I have a lot of old people that I have to go to their houses and teach them how to log in and that kind of stuff. So I'm afraid of any drastic changes is going to cause a major issue. So I would like to change it, but I'm terrified of what might happen. And
so Peter,
I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, so Peter, I forgot I was typing in a response to somebody, so I didn't hear the sequence of questions we're going to, but are we going to do Reese's question around the
let's do
because I think that ties in with what Joe
I was just going to suggest that might tie into what Joe was asking.
Yeah, exactly. So Ray, how do you feel about, I can give you kind of some things, and I don't know if you have the
I think we're gonna have multiple answers to this question, so let's.
We absolutely do. We absolutely do.
Take the first swat at it.
Okay, so the first thing would be, Reese, who's your web hosting company?
SiteGround.
And what level are you at? Do you know?
Uh,
If you're in the Go Geek or the Go Big, or?
I think I'm in the basic level, whatever that is.
Startup, yeah.
So startup is the lowest, Grow Big and Go Geek.
No, I think it's the startup.
Okay. Well, so that's where I would start, because Grow Big and Go Geek staging is built in.
Okay.
Which I'm just making sure, because some of them it's sneaking it in. Like one of my favorite, I use SiteGround and I use Flywheel. And Flywheel now has, even in the lower levels, has, I'm not sure of the lowest, but it also has staging.
So staging, maybe if you don't mind, Peter, just to explain to folks who aren't familiar with that is, so staging generally is a way to make a copy of, it starts off with you make a copy of your live website, complete copy of it into another environment, and it's separate from your live site. And the thought behind that is, especially if you're working with a very complex site, an e-commerce site or something like that, you would apply your changes to the staging site. You make your updates there, you test things out, let's say even plugin updates. If you have some really complicated plugins and things, if everything looks good, you can, a lot of people do this, especially in bigger organizations, you would then promote or move your staging site with all those changes into your live site. So it's a way to have a copy of your site and not take your live site offline or break your site. That's really one of the purposes of staging. So yeah, a lot of hosting companies have that kind of built in. So you're just clicking a button, you're basically pulling down staging.
Yeah, exactly. So when it's in your hosting and you're going through whatever control panel management that they have, here I'll show you. This is one that right now I don't have staging on, but I've got a website where this is on Flywheel, so it's a different host. I can show you SiteGround, but this is where you have to decide whether you want to either upgrade because of the convenience of having it on the same host. And the convenience is with one click, they make a copy. And then you go into the staging, you do all your changes. And if you like it, with one click, it'll upload all your changes. I mean, I totally redesigned a website on SiteGround, made a copy, did everything. Everything was different. And by one click, it just basically copied everything over because they're connected. But so in Flywheel, I would turn on staging, and then I would have a new address that I would go to that would have like staging.flywheel. In this case, it's the Kafka website, or you'll get a specific address for your staging site that you would log in if it's a copy, typically with the same everything. And when you first see it, it's going to look exactly like your site. But then you can go in and work on your staging site without touching anything in your live site. And then you can push it up. So that's the easiest way when it's built into your hosting.
Okay, and when you, in staging, if you were to change the theme that you're using,
yep.
When you go to upload it to production, if you will, that theme would change over too, and that when you've uploaded it, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So with your staging setup, what it'll do is it'll say, okay, here are all the files that aren't on one site that are on the other. The database is changed over. It's basically copying over over your site. You would make a backup of your original site right before you pushed your other site live.
Right.
A really good workflow is when you have, like, say I do, and I should have staging set up here. Of course, I bring up the one example it doesn't have it. Because the site hasn't really been live for too long. Make the changes, and it's mainly design changes. If you're doing post and page changes, then that's different. You also have to be careful of when you're overwriting a site and you haven't updated the previous the existing content. That's where it gets a little bit dicey, where you want to make sure things are in sync, or like you kind of put a stop on your live site as you're finishing up your staging site, so that you don't all of a sudden, and I've done this, I made the mistake where I had the client had added something, I had a custom post type with some photos and all, and then when I pushed things live, well, that point in time when I had grabbed the staging, did all the changes, I overwrote the database, and luckily I have a backup, but the things that she added since that went away because now I'm overwriting the database with the old stuff. So that's one of the issues to be careful with staging. when
it's
it
a
comes to
snapshot. It's a snapshot in time. And right.
exactly. And you know, if you've got a stage like with SiteGround, you can have multiple staging sites if you want. Say you want to keep one a certain way because you're working on it, and then you're doing a whole redesign. I've done that. So having it on the host, that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is setting up a subdomain, if your host allows it, where you set up a subdomain and you basically take a backup of your website and you push it onto the subdomain. One of the reasons for doing it that method is because you're on the same server. Because there is a bit of a, especially when you get into really a technical site, not technical, but one that might have a lot of, I don't know, custom, whatever, plugins and all, that if you might be really happy because you've done something local, then you push it live and it doesn't work because their server environment, maybe you didn't check and they're different PHP or whatever. So that's just, I mean, you can try to match it. So that's, as you look at the different options, that's another option to go where you do it locally and push things live. But using a subdirectory is another way to make sure you're on the same machine. There is a plugin or some multiple plugins that actually claim to do this. I have not used them. Ray, have you any experience with?
No, I know which one you're talking about, but yeah, there's ones that you're right. It'll do it as a subdomain on your own.
Yeah.
Your own hosting. I mean, the other way to do it is like I've talked about. I use what is it? WP all-in-one.
Yep.
One WP migration. And you can use that to make the backup of your site and then just install it on that subdomain. So the subdomain thing, I call the poor man staging because you can go with the cheap plans and just create a subdomain and install. The thing about subdomains too is when you create a subdomain, like Peter was showing, like his demo, I did this for most of our demos here too. I create a subdomain, I'll throw any kind of site on a brand new instance of WordPress just to play around and then after a demo, blow it away. So that's a nice thing about subdomains. It might be a little bit different use case than you were talking about.
Yeah.
That's if you just want to play around with something different and say, hey, I want to have it live so multiple people can see it. I mean, you can do that locally too. That's probably the last option I was doing local. But yeah, the process basically works the same of, you do a backup of your site, probably using a plugin of some sort. And then on your site, you create a subdomain. So instead of, yourwebsite.com, you do testing.yourwebsite.com or staging. Yeah, I think this is the plugin that you're showing, Peter. I've heard good things about this. I just haven't used it.
Yeah. 50,000 people, for some reason, they're not showing, there's the reviews. I would put this on a staging site first to test it, to see if you could do, but that's, well, not sure what the details are when you get, but yeah, so that's an option. The one thing with SiteGround, I think even at your level, you've got, not only can you do your own backups, but they have server-side backups too. So, but you should always pull a copy local and somewhere off your host site, but having that handy. But this is another option. This was, I found this page here, Themile. There's a couple of websites that are like Kinsta has some of the best blog for information, even though they are a web hosting and a lot of might show, but both Kinsta and Themile, Themile is a theme developer, their blogs are really good. And they have, so these were a couple of links that I found when I was looking for, kind of what their recommendations are too. This does touch on, and Joe, I think what you were talking too about with the idea with a staging site is you can go in and change a theme and see what it does. And what you'll see if you see our recorded presentation, is one of the things about themes is you should be relatively safe just turning on a different theme as long as you don't change anything else, and see what it does to your site and then go back to your original theme, because the beauty about WordPress and a content management system is your posts and your pages and all that kind of stuff is separate from the presentation of it, which is your themes and your style sheets and things like that.
I guess the last option I throw in for that sandbox thing is, again, running it locally. So using a program like Local by Flywheel on your computer. So you're basically pulling down your website, but then you're installing it on a local version of WordPress. So that's a complete separation. There's good things and bad things about that. I mean, this I'll typically do if I'm building a site to begin with. A lot of times I'll start it on local just because I don't want to build it on a server for whatever reason. And then I'll export this and then import it to a real site. But you can I've pulled down sites if I'm just debugging a problem or something, install it local.
Yeah.
So one thing about this though is just what Peter was alluding to too. When you're running it local, you're not running the same environment as you're running on a real server. So, you may have some surprises in between. So that's the caveat.
Yeah, but using local, what it does, and for anyone who's not seen this or hasn't seen us talk about it, is a way of having a full web server with WordPress loaded on your local machine. So you could build all kinds of websites on your computer without any hosting, without paying anybody for anything, just to experiment with. And one way that you can experiment, say what your theme would be, grabbing a backup of the site that you have, having local run local on your PC, putting that backup onto your local PC, and then going to town to experiment, not necessarily as a staging to then upload it. I mean, you can do that with some effort and all the caveats that we put into it. But say you just wanted to experiment and just say, what happens if I do this one thing? What will it do? That's another reason, that's something that you can do local to your site without having any effect on your live site. Make sense?
Yeah. Ray, going back to your turning themes on and off. So
Yeah.
It's easy as just changing the theme. But wouldn't that automatically then appear live for somebody going out to your site?
Yes.
And that's the kind of thing that it concerns me, that all of a sudden it's different for people.
If you're doing it on the live site, yeah. So you can switch the theme, everyone sees it. Yeah, that's why doing it in the sandbox, you're doing the staging thing. You're not, no one else is seeing it.
Yeah, I'm saying it's not destructive to do it, but it is, you can change what they're seeing. I did experiment literally years ago with yet another plugin that had like change your theme while you're on admin, but still show the public another theme, which was sort of a somewhere in between this WP staging plugin and just doing it. I'll see if I could take a quick find on that. But while I'm looking, what's next?
That was very helpful. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully it was helpful. It's really nice that it's right on the same server, but it costs money.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, 7:43. I don't have to go at 8 o'clock exactly, but I know. So, Reese, we covered your question. Joe, we touched on what you had. I know, Judith Ann, you had the internal or the links from one part of the site to another.
Yeah, I said bookmarks. You remember that that question? I guess I understand it totally. Was it the anchor links in a page, Judith Ann?
I don't know what it's called.
Why don't you explain what you wanted to do?
Yeah, what I want to do is I want to put in a sentence saying you can skip right to this other point, and it will skip over several paragraphs and get you right down there. So I Googled and checked on bookmarks, and that wasn't working for me. So
there's like anchor tags or anchor links and things with the.
It's called an anchor link.
Yeah, it's basically a hyperlink, but it's a hyperlink. So again, hyperlinks themselves, if you think way back to HTML, were just a way to bounce around, documents and stuff. So if Peter goes in here, I mean, basically you're putting what looks like a hyperlink, except it's a link to another section of your. It could be within the same page, Or you can also put it within another of the, let's say, a paragraph inside of another page. So you go to that page and then you jump down to that section as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I was experimenting. I thought it was on one page, but let's see. Okay. All right, so let me show you.
This might be one where you have to actually go into the.
Yeah, I thought I had a page set up here, but I must have overwrote it, which happens. I know I've got a version of it here, but I played with. Let me ignore this for a second because I'll explain that when I can. But so if maybe I have this. All right, look, your name is even here. Look at that. So there's the old way, there's the new way, and then there's the new way. And then there's the new way. So typically, historically, or going back to HTML, you would set up an anchor in your HTML that would have a name, and then you could link to, say, like click here to link to an href like you would a web page, and then the £, and then that name, so the name of that anchor. So it would jump to wherever this is on your page. Right? And you might, and I'm showing this to you only because as you're doing your Google search and saying, show me how to do this, this will be one thing that might come up because it's historical.
You're right. That did come up and it didn't work.
Exactly, because it's technically not compliant to XHTML and blah, blah, blah. So what usually is when you have a section, like a div. Now this is code on the back end. This isn't, I'll show you to you in WordPress, but if you look at the back end, you might have a section and there's different places that you could place an ID. But this ID, this ID is basically saying, okay, this section we're calling that, with that ID, we're calling this chapter 4, and then I can have a link that says click here to href equals # chapter, well, chapter 4. And then it would jump to that. So that's, and then what you typically find is where that's applied to headers, right? So if you're using headers the proper way as an outline, and now you want to jump to a certain section, you could say, give that header an ID of, say, chapter 5, click here to link to, so href equals # chapter 5, right, surrounding that. Now again, this is HTML, so on the WordPress side, but this is what's telling your browser where something is, and this is what's telling it that the word read chapter 5 is a link to that thing, right? Kind of follow at this point, Ray? Am I saying it wrong?
Yeah, one's like the first one. It's like it's the pointer down to that other thing. So
Exactly.
and they call them anchor tags. So the anchor thing again can point to anything. So
exactly. So I'm gonna take this out for a second. So I just deleted it. So one of the things that's kind of nice now, if you're using the block editor, and this is also built into many of the page builders, or all of them, I think, is say you have, like, maybe I'm setting this up, I probably should be an H2, right? And I might, if now I've got a block, so I'm in the editor, I have a heading block. This is just a straight heading. This is not headline, but it would work for the other one. If I go to, oh, see, look, I'm shooting myself in the foot.
nice. Yeah, right there.
They're calling an HTML anchor, where in a lot of cases it's called an ID. Isn't that funny?
It's the same. I mean, behind the scenes, it's
It is the same thing. So this is where you would call it, say, chapter 1, right? And then if I came here, I should be able to call this, oops. go to advanced. I should be able to call this chapter 2. I'll do one more. Let's make that each 2, and then advanced, call that chapter 3. And then update that. And now if I go and view this,
So are you saying, Peter, that the anchor is where we want the link to go to?
go to, right.
Okay.
So if I hit chapter 3, I've shot down the page to the thing that was ID'd as chapter 3. So my link up here, this is the crazy page name because this was just generated from Lorem Ipsum. I have this section here, that headline has an ID of chapter 3. So the # chapter 3 now goes to that ID on the page. If I change this to chapter 2, I should shoot up to the chapter 2 section. The one thing about the links is depending on, you can get into a little bit of funky place about, well, where does it show the chapter 2? Or
you have the WordPress admin bar is also kind of screwing it. It's overlaying. You would have landed on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The cool thing about these links too, if you saw that, is it's not just within a page. Like you could take this hyperlink and put it on another page.
Yes.
The button, it'll bring you to this page and drop you down to that section. So that's the nice thing about these anchor links. If you have a long piece of text, it's another way to kind of navigate long text. Is have
Right. Well, Peter, could you take a sentence in the paragraph and make that say, the sentence would say, if you're interested in ABC, you can go to chapter 3, and it would connect you to chapter 3.
Oh, yeah. So
that's what I wanted to do.
So if you wanted this to go, say, go to chapter 3. Let's just assume that everything was here. If I made this link then be
hashtag,
yeah, chapter 3, because it's on the same page, so I don't have to put the full URL, right? When I do that, right? So now this is a link, and if I want to, I can make it bold, to make it a little bit easier to see. So the link to this is chapter 3. So now if I update that and then view this post, that link is in the body, and it should go to that section.
Because a link is just a regular hyperlink. That's the thing about, this link is you build that just like any other hyperlink, but you're linking to an ID, in this case, that anchor on the same page.
Okay.
Was that too fast? Did that make sense?
It makes sense. I want a sentence that says, if you want to bypass this particular area and go here. So how do you put in this go to chapter 3 link? Would I just highlight the whole sentence and that becomes the hyperlink?
Yeah, well, it's up to you what you highlight. So you can put a link in anywhere. If I wanted to put a link over just that, or if I want to put, click here to jump to chapter 3.
Yes.
I could highlight this whole thing and put that same.
So I have to put hashtag chapter 3.
Yep.
And it would have worked.
If it's on the same page.
If it's
on the same page, yes.
If you're jumping to that section, go ahead, Ray.
No, I was saying if it's on another page, let's say you have another page, you want it to go to this page, chapter 3, you have to put the full HTTP URL of the page, then hashtag chapter 3.
Okay, all right.
Like he had up there.
Got it, okay.
But see how this is, boom. Now, real quick, let me show you one thing that's kind of neat, is there's a different, hello. That's weird.
What's it doing?
Every once in a while, I go to put something in and it won't take. When that happens, sometimes I just put it in the next thing down and then bring it back. You'll see in a second. But there is, for example, in the Guten blocks, and there's a number of these, they have a table of contents block. This table of contents block automatically looks for headings and looks for the IDs of those headings.
There's also a nice plugin. I use the plugin Easy Table of Contents.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a real nice one too, because that one you can actually set, like, it has a lot more settings in it because it's the plugin. So yeah, it's.
All right. Well, I took a plugin from one of the sessions that we had. I think it was the blogger who was talking about
That's what she uses, Easy Table of Contents. Yeah.
And I put it in there, and it gave me a table of contents on every single page.
You can control it though. If you go to the settings of the plugin.
Never mind, I deleted it.
Did you use the table of contents or did you use the sitemap?
I used the table of contents, but in the block now, this table of contents is just for this page. It doesn't put it on every single page, does it?
You have to add it to every page. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Much better.
Yeah. What this has done is this block basically scanned the page and looked for all the headings and then said, okay, I'm going to link to that.
All right.
Hey,
good.
From a time
Bonus.
standpoint, we actually filled 2 hours with just randomness. It's good. I hope everyone enjoyed coming for the ride on this. I like this. I learned a lot of stuff here, and there was a thread. I think we followed a thread through all these different questions and conversations. So
I think, Ray, if you allow me, I think one of the things that we try to stay kind of consistent with is this idea that there are multiple ways of doing something. Some experimentation needs to happen, and then you kind of hone in on what you become both comfortable with. But you can also ask, like, Joe, when you get into the things about the theme and you have some questions, if you're a Facebook user, or you can go to the WordPress, the Meetup page. You can, ask the question and say, hey, I'm trying this or that. What do you think? And, we'll do our best to answer. But as you're building on that, you're seeing, so not only did we add like a block that does this, but then somebody might say, well, wait a minute, when you do this, how come it scrolled down? Well, that's because that's built into the block. And a lot of these will have a lot of the page builders and all. And the block actually then has knows how to, instead of just jumping, it'll scroll down. And by the way, quick aside, there's pros and cons of even the scrolling. A lot of people like it, but if you are really concerned with accessibility and there are people who are motion sensitive, that might not be a good thing. So there's a lot of ways, but this is building on, and our next meeting, something else, there'll be another option. There'll be a way of copying styles from button to button a lot easier, for example. Okay. Soapbox off.
all right. Well, I hope